Thank you for joining me today. I'm Nathan Garner, the Project Manager and Tech Support Team Leader at Dynamic CCTV. Today we're going to be taking a look at the DeepinMind technology from Hikvision. So we're going to cover both the X model and the S model DeepinMind MVRs. I've got a couple of slides to go through, but I've tried to keep them quite short so then we can spend more time looking at both of the units on the web front end and the configuration side of things for both the units. But we'll cover some of the pros and cons of the different technologies. So with the DeepinMind MVRs, they're an MVR with a GPU chipset which runs the DeepinMind algorithms. And there's two main kind of ones for these DeepinMind series. You've got the S model, which is specifically for alarm filtering. So this is done on intrusion detection or line crossing. If you've used standard VCAs before, you know that any animals or bushes, etc. can trigger the line crossing or the intrusion detection. With the DeepinMind algorithms, what they will do is they will look at that event, and it will, depending on what you've set the actual target to, because it can be set to human and or vehicle, it'll actually filter out those false alarms at around 90% accuracy on the newer range of DeepinMind units. Perfect for monitored sites or where you're needing to have more accurate alarm results. The other unit that's available is the X model. This unit has both the alarm filtering function as well as the facial recognition function. So this allows you to have a camera up to 8 channels on the actual MVR set up for facial recognition. And this will allow you to import your own face comparison databases. So whether or not it's staff members that are allowed in the building, and then you can then configure an alert to say that there's a stranger detected by one of those 8 cameras. There is also larger units available that have more facial recognition channels up into the super NVRs, and there's also dedicated what's known as fusion servers which can do the facial recognition as well, and those go to 20 channels and 60 channels on those for that. So the two sides of DeepinMind are the false alarm reduction, which is for VCA rules such as line crossing and intrusion detection. And then you've got the facial recognition, which we'll have a look at today. Now I've got both units set up so we can take a look through that a bit later on in this webinar. So with the newer generation of DeepinMind units, the B models, the algorithms have been improved from the original units that were brought to the market for the alarm filtering. So now it can handle multiple targets within the zones, which you can see there, and the actual classification's more accurate, focusing on that specific person as the actual detection target. And you can see on this one here, it's actually classified the human and also the vehicle with that camera set up to be both vehicle and human as the target classifications for that. Whereas opposed to the bottom ones, which was based on the original DeepinMind analytics, which were less advanced and not as accurate as the newer DeepinMind B models, the MVR series. So for the false alarm filtering on the S models, you've got it for both line crossing and intrusion detection. So you can see then intrusion detection zones being drawn over some bushes, usually with an intrusion or line crossing event. If those bushes are moving, that can actually trigger the event even though it's not a human or vehicle. But with the S model DeepinMind MVRs, it will actually filter out those false alarms to 90% accuracy, which makes it a lot better for monitored sites or sites where you need more reliable alarms coming through. So those can be filtered out. It'll filter out animals, birds, even weather, which have triggered standard VCAs in the past. And it also allows you to be able to search back more easily with the quick target search on the DeepinMind MVRs as well for the system. So with the DeepinMind MVR, so this is on the actual front end of the MVR with your local menu output. So you can see this is the normal line crossing screen, but we've got 2 sets of new options, which you might have seen on some of the AccuSense DVRs as well, as these do have some of these capabilities. So you can see we've got Enable Smart Analysis. So that's the option to enable the actual DeepinMind analytics on that camera channel. And then we've also got the target, so that can be human, or it can be vehicle or both together. So then it would filter out any animals, bushes, any weather from triggering them. And then you can set your directionals for your line crossing on the system there as well. The other things that need to be set on there are the minimum and maximum sizes onto the demo as well. But it's pretty similar from a setup kind of view to your standard VCA setup. Just a couple of extra options in there, as well as your minimum and maximum sizes that can also help with the filtering accuracy of the system for them. So with regards to the actual setup of the units, there is limitations on the way the cameras are mounted to do with the angles and the actual maximum detection zones, which can be calculated, and we do have the full setup guides for the alarm filtering analytics available from us at Dynamic CCTV. The main area to look for when it comes to the actual setup of DeepinMind Analytics is the maximum and minimum size the object can be on screen. So the algorithm will work up to half of the image size of the full camera view. So if an object is larger than that, you can have issues with the actual detections, and it's no smaller than 1/16 of the image size. And this is just based on 1080p 2 megapixel camera. With the DeepinMind MVRs, if it says that it's a 16S model, that means it has 16 channels capable of the false alarm filtering, but that is at 2 megapixel resolution. If you use 4 megapixel cameras, for example, that would be reduced to 8 channels of DeepinMind Analytics on the MVR, and then it would be down to 4 at 8 megapixel resolution on the cameras. So that is limited when it comes to the resolutions of the system there for the actual detection, which is something to watch out for when putting in these types of systems or installing them on existing sites already have cameras set up, which is taking into account the resolutions of the cameras and how many channels you'll want to have with the analytics enabled on. So with regards to the false alarm filtering, there's a couple of things that need to be considered. So the minimum and maximum detection sizes do need to be configured to make it more accurate on your detection results. With regards to the video encoding, the analytics will only work with H.264 and H.265. It won't work with the plus variants of the encoding and will stop the analytics from working. You also need to consider whether or not you just want humans to be detected. So on the camera that I'm going to demo our system on, it's the PEZ that covers our car park for our building. I've got it set to only detect on vehicles. I don't want to see when people are walking in and out to go on lunch or anything like that. So it's kind of deciding what you need on site is to be alerted to, whether that be vehicles and or humans. You've also got to take into account the mounting angles for the cameras. If the camera angle's too obscure or anything like that, and it can't actually see the person correctly before entering the zones, that can have an effect on the actual algorithm and make it less reliable for your detections. You also need to consider the actual distance of the target, so where you actually want to be able to pick up the person or the vehicle with the line crossing or intrusion detection. If it's at a greater distance, then you could need a bigger lens or a varifocal lens, which makes it easier to actually focus the camera on the area that you want it to be or for coverage, and then you can then set up your analytics as you want to. And you also need to make sure that you've got enough channels of the alarm filtering to cover the site that you need to be covered on the actual system itself. So it is always worth checking those depending on which of the NVRs you go for. And there is also the super NVRs, which have more channels that you can enable the alarm filtering on as well, which you can always discuss with us depending on the scenario. So for the facial recognition, this is currently based on the X model DeepinMind MVRs. It used to be a 4F and an 8F unit, which is now the X model DeepinMind, which is the higher end DeepinMind for facial recognition. This allows you to set up a blocked list. So for example, if it was a shopping centre and you had cameras set up at the entrances and you wanted to upload people to a blocked list on the actual DeepinMind MVR, you can say, for example, if they're banned from the shopping centre, You can then have an alert triggered when they appear at any of the entrances, which can then warn any security staff or anything like that through the actual system. It can also be used as an attendance system as well, which would then integrate with Hikvision for an attendance system on site for your actual database, as you can upload pictures and assign names to those pictures on the system, and Hikvision can then take that information in and use it as your employee's attendance system on your main entrance, for example, as well. The benefit of the X model DeepinMind MVR rather than facial recognition cameras is you can actually search back by a face picture. So if you've got a DeepinMind MVR set up, recording footage on specific entrances or specific cameras on a site, and there's been an incident, or for example there's a missing person and you want to see if they've been in the premises, you can take that picture and upload it to the MVR and search back the footage on those camera channels to see if they have been in the building through the system as well, which is how it would be done on the actual unit direct. So through the search by picture face on the MVR itself, you can upload a picture of a person and search back against the cameras that have the facial recognition enabled on to see if that person's been in the building or detected on any of the cameras. You can also do frequency alerts on the facial recognition MVR, so if a person appears multiple times within a given time frame, that could then trigger an alert on the system. Or if a person hasn't been seen for a specific amount of time, which is good for use for care homes or anything like that. For members of staff, if a nurse hasn't walked down a corridor, that can actually trigger an alert on the system and say there hasn't been a nurse that's visited this corridor in a certain length of time through the system. There's also the function for stranger detection. So what this will do is you'd have a comparison database uploaded to the NVR for example employees. Anyone that's detected by the cameras that aren't uploaded to that face comparison database can trigger a strange detected alarm. So you know a stranger's in the building when there shouldn't be. It can also be used, I've worked with sites that have used it for colleges and universities where they've used the Hikvision solution. They've integrated that with Active Directory to pull in users' profiles from the system, which most students have an ID card. They've used those pictures and added them into the facial recognition database with the cameras at the main entrance and exits. And if a stranger enters the building, that can trigger an alert to the system automatically, and then security can then be informed. And it can also be used as an attendance system or access control system that way as well, when used with the Hikvision VMS solution for those. So what we'll do is I will bring up the web front end of the MVRs and we'll go through the actual setup of the DeepinMind side of things, so both facial recognition and the false alarm filtering. So I'll just move the screen over. So this is the web front end of the S model DeepinMind MVR. So this is the alarm filtering DeepinMind unit. You can see that I've got a PEZ added. So what I can do is if I go into configuration, if I just go into system first, you can see this is the B model and DeepinMind MVR, and it's got 16 channels denoted by the 16S of false alarm filtering. This is current firmware that I'm currently running on for the actual MVR itself. What we've also got is an option for VCA configuration, just now system settings here. This gives you the engine status, which is the GPU that's built into the NVR for the actual analytics. So you can see it's configured into perimeter protection mode. You'll see when we look at the X model NVR that there is a secondary mode on that one, but on the S model it's just perimeter protection, which is false alarm filtering on intrusion detection and line crossing. So if I go into event here and then go to smart event, you can see there I've got enable AI by device. So that's the DeepinMind algorithm actually enabling that on the camera channel. I've enabled the line crossing, I've drawn my line crossing zone, and I've also set the detection target to vehicle. What I've also got on screen there is the minimum and maximum detection sizes. So an object needs to be larger than the minimum box there to be able to trigger the actual line crossing, and it will then run the algorithm on that object. And anything that's larger than the maximum size will also get ignored as well for that on there. And we can then set up our linkage actions, whether or not we want audible warning, notify surveillance center to go through to the HikConnect app, IVMS 4200 and the HikCentral VMS software as well. And we can have that triggering alarm outputs or anything like that, whatever we need for the VCA to trigger. So anytime a vehicle drives through that gate, it will trigger an alert through to the system, which you might have been hearing in the background when I started the webinar when the recorder was beeping. So that's because I've got audible warning enabled on this event. But what I can do is I can go in and set up an intrusion zone as well. So enable AI by device is enabled at the top for the camera channel, and then I can tick to enable intrusion detection, and then I can then draw my area. So if I wanted my area to cover these parking spaces here, I can then set it to be a vehicle, and I can then set the maximum and minimum size. So that'll be my maximum size there, and the minimum size, which there won't be a vehicle smaller than that when it comes through. The threshold is the length of time in seconds the vehicle would need to be in that intrusion zone in order for it to trigger an alarm, which I can set all the way up to 10 seconds. And there you can hear that the line crossing is just triggered there in the background of the audible warning. So if I now save that, a vehicle would then need to enter that intrusion zone and stop there for more than 10 seconds in order for an alert to trigger through to the system. So for the actual alarm filtering, it's nice and easy to set up, just a couple of extra options through the web front end. The only kind of things to really watch out for is the distances that you're working with, the camera's going to be blocked or anything like that, and also the actual encoding. So if we go into our video and audio settings here, you can see I've got the H.265 Plus option turned off. If that's turned on, it will stop the actual algorithms from working on that camera channel and only use the standard H.264 or H.265 video encoding when using the DeepinMind algorithms. So that's the S model, DeepinMind MVR for alarm filtering. What we can do is switch over to my X model NVR, go into configuration and go to our system settings and basic information. You can see this one is an X model, the X at the end, and it's the second generation B unit. And this unit will allow you to have up to 8 channels of facial recognition on the unit at 4 megapixel. If you use 8 megapixel cameras, that will reduce to 4 channels of facial recognition on the system. If I go into the VCA configuration, you can see there that the engine status is running and it's in face recognition mode. If I click on that, I can actually get a drop down to change that to perimeter protection. So that would then convert the X model into kind of like an S model. And on the higher end super NVRs, you can actually have both alarm filtering and facial recognition running on the same unit. So there wouldn't be a need for 2 separate units on the higher end super NVRs for those. So for the facial recognition, we need to go into our VCA configuration and go into face capture. So for the facial recognition side of things, it uses the face capture option on the MVR to take a capture of a person when they're seen by the camera, and then the MVR would then compare that to the face recognition databases you've created on the system. So you can see we've got the dynamic analysis enabled for face detection and our schedules set to continuous. We can alter the capture interval and the capture times depending on the site, and I've just got my image quality set to medium for this setup. And on the linkage method, I've got the audible warning enabled, as well as notify surveillance centre. You then need to draw the actual rule for the face capture. So when a person walks into the green area here, which is where I've set the face capture rule to be, it then takes capture on the system for that. And you can also set the minimum pupil distance. So this can help with when people are just walking past the camera or at a further distance that you want to kind of rule out from triggering on the actual camera. You'd set up your minimum pupil distance for that. You can also create shield regions to block out certain areas of the camera where you don't want the face recognition or face capture to be done on the system. Once that's configured, you then need to go into the face picture library. So you can see we've got a strangers library and also a dynamic library which I've created here. And you can see I'm set up on the system with my name, my gender and my date of birth, as well as my telephone number. You can see that modelling has been succeeded on the system, and that the face grading, so that'll be how well the actual algorithm can work on the picture that was uploaded, has a high score. If we wanted to add another person into this, we can click on the add button there, go to upload, and upload a picture from the actual system, or from the PC should I say, to upload to the library, and we can then enter their name and their gender and the date of birth if we wanted to, and add them to the actual comparison list for that. Once you've got your face picture libraries configured on the MVR, you can then go into the event section and go to face comparison. So we've got a few different options in here. We need to enable it firstly on the system, and our arming schedule set to continuous on this one here. And then we've got a few different options for the linkage methods. So if it's a face matched to our comparison, we can set it to be an audible warning and notify surveillance centre to trigger through to our software applications such as IVMS 4200 and the Hikvision VMS software. If a face is mismatched on the events, we can actually set up a different alert. So that may be something that's not known to the system. We could have that send an email instead. We can also set it to trigger PEZ if we wanted to, or trigger on other cameras that are added to the actual MVR. In the face picture library, this is where we configure which libraries or databases we want to be doing the comparisons on. So you can see I've got it set to the dynamic library, which I had configured, and I've just got the similarity set to 50%. So anytime anyone walks in front of the camera, it will then take a face capture and compare them to the face picture library that I've got uploaded to the NVR itself. And what we can then do is use things like IVMS 4200 or Hikvision to actually receive those events. So if I just minimize this window here and bring up the AI dashboard. So this is the IVMS 4200 AI dashboard that works in conjunction with the facial recognition side of things, and it's also been used a lot recently for your facial recognition temperature screening solutions. So whenever someone walks in front of the detection zone, as I'm a known user, it's compared me to my original uploaded picture to the database, and it's matched me at 98% on the system. I can click on view details, so you can see there it's got my name, date of birth and my gender, as well as my phone number, which it's pulled up from the information that I entered when I uploaded my picture to the comparison database from there. If, for example, it was a stranger that was actually that triggered the event, it would alert on the system and give you notifications saying that a stranger's been detected by the actual DeepinMind VR, which makes it a really powerful system, really easy to use, makes areas a lot safer and easier to find people that you're looking for that have been in front of any of the cameras or that might have been detected on site, which makes it a lot easier to manage from the system. So that's both the DeepinMind S model for alarm filtering and the X model DeepinMind unit, which is for the facial recognition side of things on the actual system. So that's a quick look at both of those units on the DeepinMind side of things. So at Dynamic CCTV, we do have a full technical support team and offer any technical support on equipment that's being purchased from ourselves, which are always willing to take your phone calls on any queries that you might have. And we do also have videos on our Dynamic CCTV YouTube channel, and we do post on social media quite regularly with useful hints and tips and videos on any new products that we do launch from our side of things. If you've got any questions, you can contact me on my email addresses there, and I can answer any questions that you may have. And I'll start looking at the Q&A section now. So Graham has asked, can any Hikvision IP camera be used with the X and S series MVR as long as they are 2 megapixel or less? It will work on any camera that you use added to the MVR. To be able to use all 16 channels of the false alarm filtering, it would need to be 2 megapixel, but you can use higher resolution cameras. It just reduces the amount of channels you can have the functions enabled on, but it will work with any of the Hikvision cameras added to the either MVR for those. For that, pretty much all the Q&As that have come through from the system. If you'd rather ask me any more in-depth questions or anything like that, you can always drop me an email. Contact details are on the screen there, which we're always happy to help with there. Nigel's just put another Q&A in. If I use 2 megapixel cameras on facial recognition, can I get 16 channel analysis? So with the X model MVR, it's a maximum of 8 channels of facial recognition when the actual MVR is doing the face capture. If you use cameras with face capture, you can upload more libraries, but if the MVR is doing the brunt of the work, it is a maximum of 8 channels unless you use the higher end super NVRs, the facial recognition for those. I'd just like to say thank you for joining me on today's webinar. Be sure to watch out for some more webinars that we've got up and coming over the next few weeks. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you. Bye.